Hi, welcome to Primeplus Senior Center's contribution to the mayor's and council Believe in Learning for the city of Norfolk. What an awesome initiative that is. The idea of bringing information, educational opportunities, engagement and involvement to the entire city of Norfolk and beyond to show that as a city, as a community, being introduced to new information and engage with each other in exploring that information is very important in building a safe, respectful, and inclusive community. So today it's my honor as Executive Director, Bob Batcher of Primeplus Senior Center, to bring two panelists with me, panelists and friends and board members of Primeplus, to really have a discussion about how do you build a safe, respectful, inclusive community in today's world. Because boy, does this seem complicated. We've kind of been, I was gonna say rehearsing, but really we've kind of been chit-chatting. A good old-fashioned conversation, which we want to continue on. I'm joined by Dr. Stephen C. Jones, retired superintendent of schools for the city of Norfolk, and a whole bunch of other stuff prior to that, which I want you to tell us about. Kind of your journey has built where you are today, right? And Andrea Warren, PhD, retired.
Yay.
You're not really
Loving life.
Director of Governor's School for the Performing Arts, right?
Yes, that's my heart.
But again, you had a journey
That's it.
that got you here.
That's it.
Tell me a little bit about your journey.
Oh my gosh, I grew up in Richmond area, came to this area, got married, got a husband, got married, had a kid. I spent time as a teacher while here teaching health and physical education in Virginia Beach, started in Portsmouth, then went to Virginia Beach, coached basketball, boys and girls basketball and track for a number of years, left Virginia Beach, came to the governor's school as the assistant director, served there for 2 years in that position. And then the superintendents selected me to be the executive director, and that's my heart. The arts, that's my heart, passion.
But I gotta ask you, how does basketball lead to the arts?
Well, you know, there are a lot of similarities, right? Because as an artist, or if you're working with young artists, you're teaching them. You're giving them the play, right? It is a team sport. You know, it's except visual arts, but instrumental music, theater, everything else is a team sport. So you're coaching them, you're working with them, you're molding them to be the best artists that they can be. Same thing as a coach, you're working with them, you're giving them the skills to be the best athlete they can be. They're working out daily, right? As an athlete, you're working out daily as a young artist because you have to practice. We're practicing on the court. They're practicing in the studio. There are a lot of similarities.
I want to come back to you after Steve talks about his journey, about how do you balance stardom with team?
You know what? How do you balance it?
Yeah.
Well, you should always be a student, right?
Okay.
When you get to the point where you are a star, you were saying you don't have to learn. There's nothing else left for you to learn. I think just as like an athlete, a star, there's always something more to learn. That's how you grow as an artist. That's how you grow as people.
And sometimes you learn by giving it back, right?
Right. I give it back
All the time, you know.
That's why I'm
Steve,
here.
Dr. Steve Jones.
Just real quick, it's interesting when you talk about learning, because I think if you continue to ask yourself about things that you don't understand and you don't know, that will prompt you to continue to learn. But if you get to the point where my grandmother used to say you're a know-it-all, then you're in trouble.
Why are you guys looking at me when you say things like that? So what makes you such a know-it-all then?
Well,
Because I have a feeling your grandma told you that for a reason.
I would question it. I've always
Okay.
questioned it in an effort to learn. I mean, I just didn't take things at face value. I can recall challenging a pastor in our church about some of the things that he was saying about what was acceptable and not acceptable in terms of how we should act in church. But anyway, I started out with the Norfolk County Schools as a classroom teacher and stayed there for almost 20 29 years before I moved on. And I started as a teacher, department chairman, then assistant principal, then principal. And then I ran a program to help deal with the disparity with minority students, increasing minority achievement. And then from there, I went to associate superintendent, and then I applied for the superintendent's job in Syracuse. Prior to moving to Syracuse, I spent 2 years with the Kennedy Foundation. I mentioned earlier that I ran a science education program there. Then after leaving Syracuse, I was thinking about retiring, but I wanted to come back closer to home, which is Baltimore, and the opening here in Norfolk was just a perfect.
I happen to be the PR guy for the city of Norfolk when you came on board, right? And I don't know if I should tell the world what we said before you came on board, but I think it started with a hallelujah. Really coming in and bringing that experience to influence the future of. And I've been looking at my journey. The last thing I thought I'd ever be is the director of a senior center. I started off with the Red Cross because that was my introduction to the adult world. I had been a volunteer. My mom had been, so I was told that's what I should be. So for 20 years, I was with the Red Cross and services. That pivoted, some would say, retired from that, and then became available to be the PR guy for the city of Norfolk for 20 years, and spent that time building community. Because prior to that, with the Red Cross, there was no Red Cross that was grassroots oriented. What I loved most about my job, besides saving lives by getting people to get blood, was to get into a plant and learn how that plant works. To get a tour, because you had to understand how that plant worked in order to get people to get blood in their workplace, or how that community, what made that community fit. And some of those stories still live with me, like the idea of going to Perry, Georgia, to meet with the blood drive chairman. This is in the late 70s. Doctor, he's a doctor. I'm sitting in a room with 1,000 pictures of white babies. But I heard all this noise in the background, and the person I was listening to, he's having office hours at that. So when our appointment time came up, I went back, and there's another room identical. 1,000 pictures of black babies. In the late 1970s, was running 2 separate office hours. And someone made the comment that's unusual because that office, the black office, was close to the department like normally was flipped. That was a whole new world to me. And if I hadn't taken some curiosity to figure out what made things tick, then I may not have learned that. And that lesson has stayed with me as now that I'm the director of a senior center. And how does that play in? That's what we're going to be talking about next.
What skills, Bob, do you think are applicable for this job that you had to have in your previous job?
Well, if I went into a community meeting and my goal was to convince that community component that my way was the best way, probably it was going to be more difficult. I mean, I could be persuasive. My mom taught me some pretty good skills. But if I could sit down with that community and say, okay, what is it that we really want to accomplish? And I started our conversation off with that. What are some common goals that I could have success? So when I came to Primeplus, we had some very strong missions. We were going to bring people together for exercise. Odds are, if you ask people, they came and what they got out of coming to Primeplus was exercise. Or in our adult day, it was a place where I could bring my mom, who can't be left alone during the day, and she found some peace, which would give me peace.
Right.
But what is it that we want to try to accomplish while they're here? What brought them here? As we started this conversation, what was their journey? In the case of somebody who can't be left alone, they have a new relationship called caregiver relationship. If we could provide an engagement where that caregiver can be the husband or the wife for this daughter or the son, instead of being defined by the current situation, that they could go back to their journey. With the active side, one of the things I've talked about is island hopping. That as we go through life, we have a series of islands: school, synagogue, church, work, where we interact with people. So if we can recreate that here at Prime Plus, where you can have that engagement of involvement, of giving back, of having value. And that's what led to building a safe, respectful community. What's it got to do with strength exercises? Because what's going to keep you coming back isn't the stronger abs, but that friend that you know,
The community,
that sense of community.
right?
And so I think accepting that if we put our community first,
Do you think there's a shared vision amongst the folks that are on the board that's the direction you see the organization?
well, I probably should throw it back to the two of you because you're board members. Yes, definitely do. They do. And so I think one of the things that we've become committed to is making sure that we, on a daily basis, exercise some kind of activity that strengthens a safe, respectful, inclusive community. Because as you're going to hear later on, that's the bridge to creating an environment that people can have an openness. And that can be focused on their commonality instead of differences. And yet, acknowledge that there are differences. How can we build upon them? One of the things, programs that I'm really excited about in our operations director Chantel helped create this prior to COVID. We have several senior mid-rise towers that are run by Norfolk Housing NRHA. And there was a need for getting them to build a community, but a broader community. And going back to the idea that there's a series of islands and that inclusion begins in the heart of wanting to, the yearning to go out and explore and meet people. So we put together a program where we're an independent nonprofit with a membership. You got to pay the membership fee. And NRHA made a commitment to pay for 35 memberships. And then we had an open house. And anybody could come from the senior mid-rises. And if they liked it, then the invitation was given where they could come and participate. All 35 were taken up. And not necessarily just to go to class, exercise class, but to participate in ceramics or bingo or the wood shop, those kinds of things. And what we discovered was there was no sign in it. There was no label. We're going to talk a little bit about labels, I think, that'll come up. There were no labels, but what we discovered, oh my gosh, we've got Carolyn taking stretch, flex, and tone next to Mildred in March. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the community piece is so important. My mother lives in a senior community, and she's such a social being, and she's 80, mom is 84 years old. And we were talking yesterday, and she has girlfriends who live in communities too, but they don't have activities. There's nothing for them to do. The community itself is not inclusive, it's not welcoming. But my mother's community, my mom counts cards. So they have poker. She's always cheating, I tell her all the time. And she's learned all of these.
Speaking of cheating, I got a technical thing. Keep talking.
They have all
Calling
of
your
these
mom
neat games that she's learning, and it's keeping her brain healthy. She's learning how to play all these different cards. They have wine night, they have all these, I guess they have all of these events every night.
Sounds like she's having a ball.
She is having a ball, and I'm happy because I heard, my father-in-law lives with us now, and we're having a hard time motivating them to get up. My mom doesn't have that problem. She's using a cane now, but she's not moving as quickly as she used to. But she loves getting up, hanging out in there. They have lunch together, they have breakfast together, then she has all these games that she's playing every week. If I don't call her at a certain time or I can't reach her, I'm calling my sister, where is she? Oh, she has a guard game tonight, something that night. And she's having a great time. She has a reason to get up. And T.D. Jakes said, elderly people, for some reason, the older they get, they feel like they have no value. They have nothing to do. So they stop. When you stop moving, you lose your muscles, right? you lose your ability. My father-in-law has fallen twice because he gets up from the bed, he sits in a chair, he won't get dressed to come downstairs. And we are afraid that if he stops moving, like my mother-in-law, he will be bedridden. I'm not gonna have that problem with my mom. He can't sit her down.
Now, the minute I said retired, though, you said, hooray. So did you define retirement by not setting the alarm?
Oh,
Because see, the two of you, you can't say retired about that. I retired for 10 days. That was it.
I still have a schedule. I still get up, I still get on the computer. I'm involved in 3 different boards. But I'm having a blast doing that. I'm getting ready to start a foundation. My daughter travels a lot, so I can get up, not take leave, and go.
And be a mom.
And be a mom. And tell my husband, I'm out.
How about you, Steve?
Well, I think I'm as active now as I was when I was running the school district. I just don't have a lot of night meetings, which I don't particularly.
Makes your wife happy.
Well, she's busy too.
Oh,
But I've taken on some responsibilities that heretofore I had been involved in. For example, I'm very active in my church. It's something I didn't do many years. Involved in Rotary, I ran the Such and Buck program being involved with for over 6 years. I'm president of my community association, and I was just out talking with representatives from the city, talking about different things that we need to do. I know all of my neighbors. I mean, that's one of the things I really enjoy the most about being involved with my community association. I know all of the neighbors in my cul-de-sac. I can get out and walk the neighborhood and people call me by name and I'm calling them by name. So, it's that kind of feeling of you're making a contribution, but you feel welcome and you feel appreciated.
we're gonna use a word throughout this, Ryan probably will, intentionality. So when that retirement date hit, do you feel like you were intentional about maintaining the level of engagement involvement you had?
I think for myself, I was intentional because I felt it was time to go.
Right.
But then after I left, it's like I didn't know what I was doing, right? So I had to figure it out.
And that was about the time I called you.
Yeah, probably. I wasn't sure because I missed the school and I still miss the school a lot. And I could not go back in the building. I didn't feel comfortable going back in the building. Because I did go in the building and came out and had a panic attack. It was, that sadness. It was almost a little depression, I guess. So I had to figure it out. But now I'm good.
Yeah, it's like I remember getting a first retirement check, but good. Except wait a minute, I worked 20 years to get that check.
Yeah.
Now it feels pretty good. How about you, Steve?
It's interesting because my wife and I decided to move from Syracuse to get closer to Baltimore. And because we were in a city that we didn't know when we moved there, we were there for over 6 years. We became extremely close. Even though I was spending a lot of time working, I spent almost every free moment that I had with my wife. We arrived here, and a year after we got here, she was diagnosed with cancer. And she went in remission for 1 year, and then it came back. And that last year was just one of the worst years of my life. She passed away. And at that point, I just lost the fire in my belly. I didn't feel like I really wanted to do work anymore because I didn't have my partner. I didn't have that. She had an effect on me that I would never be able to bring the job home. She was able to get me to come down. It's a term they use in the Navy when you get out of the water, you have to decompress. Right. I was able to do that, and I've since remarried, so I'm feeling that energy level back. But that was a powerful time for me, and I just, the old saying that when you lose the fire in your belly, I just didn't feel the need to go up against all the issues that I was dealing with in the school system and not have that safe haven when I came home.
But yeah, you've identified and strengthened new islands.
Yeah.
Because that's where you and I met, was over Relay for Life, remember that?
That's
And,
right.
and I remember walking over what little hill there was
Yeah.
with you, and you used the decompress, that clearly you were fighting a battle.
Yeah.
And it was through that common knowledge that the teachers had of you, that they became so loyal to wanting to make, there was a reason for their commitment to Relay for Life for cancer. Okay, this has been a great conversation. And this is where the three of us will differ, because can you imagine me using a syllabus, let alone an outline, right? But you guys lived in the syllabus world, the lesson plan. And now we're struggling with this idea of informing a community to change it. So earlier we were talking, I was raised by a Iwo Jima Marine. And so he was legislated into integration as an 18-year-old. We will be, Marine Corps will be integrated, and it doesn't matter who's in the hole next to you, you're gonna look out for each other's back. Now we're starting to come in with some political discussions about race relations and thou shalt be, and there's a lot of terms being thrown around. So where I talk about safe, respectful, inclusive communities, Steve, there's I think you called it something earlier. IDEA, and if you don't understand those from a teacher's point of view, that's the foundation of learning, right? Understand those terms?
I think
Or is it what we just did for the last 10 minutes?
I think we put labels on things that we've been trying to do for some time, and we categorize to a certain extent those four concepts. But by and large, when you think about schools, and if you're a parent and you have a child that's disabled, and if there's access for the child to get into the building, if you have a child who has special needs, are we putting them in a school that's, on the other side of railroad tracks, they're there with other kids, or do we include those kids in the regular program? Do we allow for kids to engage in physical activity like the Special Olympics? Or do we just say those kids, because they have a disability, they aren't able to participate? Do you have a situation where the administration and the school district believes that a female can't run a high school as a principal? I mean, those kinds of issues have been things that we've confronted, and as a result of these concepts, we've tried to move away from that. And I think to a certain extent, we have colleges and universities have incorporated this sense of inclusion and equity and access, and understanding the importance of diversity. It goes back as far as 25, 30 years ago with affirmative action. A lot of folks have difficulty with that now, but it was the idea of trying to level the playing field. I had a professor who once said that, for certain kids, particularly African American kids, if you're running a mile race, 4 laps, some of those kids have had shackles around their ankles for 3 laps, and then the shackles come off for the 4th lap. So when you think about how that plays out as a concept or as an idea, it really has some relevance when you think about making sure that everyone has an opportunity based on their skills, that they have a chance to achieve. And I think schools have to do it, and right now the communities have to do it as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting when we think about this history of why IDEA even came about. It was to level that playing field for special needs kids with regular kids. It was providing them with, because everybody in that idea, everybody learns differently. Everybody, not everyone is the same. So we have to accept those differences and level that playing field, because everyone has a right to achieve.
Well, and women in sports.
Exactly.
I mean, right now, it's becoming very much aware that there's a difference in pay and opportunity, but going back how many years in colleges, there were no women teams.
That's right. And there wasn't money for scholarships for female athletes either.
Cheerleading, yes.
Well, there weren't scholarships for cheerleading. Well, it is a sport, but that's another, that might be a.
But no, but that's one of those things that when we go to labels,
Right.
you know, that's the place where women belong.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting that men were able to cheer faster than a female learning baseball? And now we're seeing more little girls playing baseball.
I was never asked to play baseball or cheer.
Oh, okay.
Steve on the other hand. I tell you what, let's go ahead and pull up those terminologies. And for those that know them, it's beyond just, I have an idea. They know what they are, we can refresh, or for those that don't know, understand what we're talking about. And who wants to teach these?
Well, I think they're self-evident, but we can look at the formal definitions for each of them. And
Okay.
maybe give an example for each of those items.
So this is that new technology that I don't understand called share stream that we're gonna do. Here,
Well, look, you spoke it and
And there it
it
is.
happened.
you know, it's the magic of Chantel. I have to give her credit for that. There it is.
Okay, well, when we talk about IDEA, and that's what those four terms represented with that acronym. Inclusion is really, I think, the example that we gave, that Andrea gave earlier about wanting to make sure that special needs students were part of the entire learning process in a school, not just in a separate classroom, but given an opportunity to participate in all of the accoutrement associated with the school, sports, clubs, all the activities associated with being a full-fledged member of a school. Diversity is nothing more than understanding that there are differences that exist amongst us, and not just racial differences. We talked about the issue with girls, females. We talk about issues now with kids that are trans. We've got issues with kids, for example, my granddaughter, her mother is Latino, and her father is my son. I think it's African American, but when she's asked to denote on a form, what is she? I mean, she's kind of hard pressed to say, I don't necessarily fit into those little neat categories. So, and equity for me, and this is something that goes back to my training and education. Equity is giving someone basically what they need. For example, if we talk about being equal, if we have a pie, you get a slice, I get a slice, and you get a slice, and it's the same size. But if I haven't eaten in 4 days, and you've eaten just an hour ago, the slice that I get may be bigger than yours. So equity is really making an adjustment based on where kids are and the needs that they have. It's not always giving everybody the same thing. There are allowances that we have to make because of certain circumstances. And access is just saying that you can get in. There was an article that was in the newspaper yesterday that said of the major NASDAQ boards that they quantify, the representation on the part of minorities and females is well below the population that exists amongst those groups in the population. So in other words, we're still dominated by decision-making for the most part by white males. So access means being able to sit at the table, sit at the board, and have some input into decision-making that will ultimately affect everything. I have to say, for example, I feel a little uncomfortable from time to time going to a Rotary meeting, and often at a Rotary, I'm the only African American in the meeting. There are 134 Rotarians. So I think, and I don't feel put upon. I don't feel as though I'm not accepted as a full-fledged Rotarian. But I would love to see more diversity within that organization.
Well, and you mentioned that for if you weren't at the table or in that room, then to say, so have someone to say, hey, I know Steve and I know what he thinks, and this is what he should have. It's not the same as Steve being at the table saying, here's what I think today.
But the one thing that I know, for example, that allows me to continue to come back and not protest by not being a part of it, I know there is an effort, particularly with the current president, to increase the diversity within the organization. within Rotary. And when I came to the policymakers that put the program together this past year, I said, we really should have an acknowledgement for Black History Month of some of the contributions. And they were quick to accept that idea. So I know that they're working on it, but again, it's something that's a work in progress.
But they're being intentional about it too.
Yes.
And that's it. You
That's-
have to be intentional.
Yes.
You have to think, okay, we need to add more, bring more people to the table to have the discussion. It has to be intentional. Because if it's not intentional, people, you're not gonna reach out to those people with differences, and they're not gonna feel comfortable barging in.
And that's one of the reasons the three of us were in front of this Zoom camera, because I can remember the conversations I had with both of you when I called to see if you'd be interested in serving on the Primeplus board. You and I sat next to each other in one board, Harabo. We're not allowed to sit next to each other anymore, because we get in trouble.
Get in trouble.
That proud parent thing. So we kind of were able to focus on your strength. What I was looking for was pushing really a evidence-based training and how to bring, if you can put evidence with the arts that we put us in your programming. And then your love for serving the community. Steve, you were pretty direct with me though about, and I think you're about ready to be direct with me again in front of the camera about, how, are you serious about trying to change the complexion or the future of Primeplus? My answer hopefully satisfied you, but it also has defined our future journey together.
Can I say it's interesting that you question that? Because for me, I'm gonna say something that might not be very popular, but I typically know that when I'm asked to serve is to be that token, and I'm trying to, I'm not gonna question it, I'm gonna try to make, but then if I see that we aren't bringing more to the table, then I'm gonna probably not out, because I'm okay with being the first, but let's add to that conversation.
Well, and as our vice president said, the first, but there better be more than a lot more.
Exactly.
But Steve, you kind of you alluded to the idea of being at the table, deciding to be at the table or protest and not be at the table. We're all, I'm going to say this, we're all kind of within, I think we discovered 7 years of age. So we're in the same generation. And in our generation, I remember back in college being told, I don't believe in this, so I'm not coming to the table. And there was some, let's walk away from it. What do you say to somebody who says, I'm just going to protest by not being at the table? Because you're reminding me that I made a commitment by being at the table.
It's hard to say. I mean, you don't want to be Don Quixote and chase after windmills.
Right.
But you want to be intentional about where you want to plant your feet and really do battle if you feel that that organization really has the ability to make a major impact on the community. And I felt both with Rotary and with Primeplus, that was the case. So I may have protest some of the things that I saw happening, but I would do it from within. I would not have backed away. Like Andrea, if I got in, I just felt like I was just, sitting in the corner being isolated and not having a voice. No one's going to continue to put up with that sort of stuff.
You basically said to me, prove it. And where was Prime? You did. And yeah, see, he's not denying. And where, where was Primeplus back when, right? So can we tell us that?
Well, that's true, but, and I don't think I've ever said this, and please take it with a grain of salt, because there's been some changes. But your predecessor, I had an opportunity to work with her on several occasions. And there were some leadership qualities that she demonstrated in those encounters that we had, that I suspect were very similar to the leadership qualities that were evident during her tenure here. And there was some incongruence with me wanting to be a part of that top-down kind of, and I can say that to her. I mean, it's just, and I think it was reflected to a certain extent in the organization. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I worked with the mayor who tended to have a top-down for a bit, and then he changed, he
The
changed.
previous.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, I've been married 44 years. I've raised 2 daughters, and I tell the team here, if you leave me on my own accord, 70% of the time I'll be wrong. That's what they tell me. So I've got to listen to people. But I also think that Prime Plus, also known as Norfolk Senior Center, was a sign of the times. And let me kind of visit
A
those
sign of the times
at the time
here in Norfolk.
in Norfolk, right? Keep in mind, Norfolk Senior Center was born out of the Older American Act in the mid-60s. We know through history that the state of Virginia decided to take integration very aggressively by closing schools. So it was a divided community to begin with. And so when under the Older American Act, our founder, who was very good, instrumental in bringing the federal policy, funding, and recognition to seniors, but seniors of different color had different needs. And so there's the picture of what Prime Plus looked like in the 70s and 80s. That was what Norfolk looked like. You see anything missing?
Yeah, people who look like me.
Yeah, people of color.
But the thing about it is that we all have the same needs.
Exactly.
Just different
But
colors.
they were met someplace else. Just keep
Yeah.
in mind at that time, that's when East Kent was being improved upon. Now we call it gentrified. And poverty was being managed in one location. So there was those kinds of justifications.
But you said that the African American population at the time had different needs. What needs did they have that were different than their white family? I don't know. No.
Those are some of those premises, I think that.
But see, again, I would wonder if that were the case, someone would ask the question, what are those needs? And are we in a position to address them, or these needs far exceed our capabilities of trying to assist in some way? Because they are citizens, they are taxpayers.
Well, let me go to the next slide. You guys react to that. This was the loving board that hired me 5 years ago. Again, you see anything missing?
Yeah, people of color. But
Yeah.
that, I think that was the mindset of everyone that was this thing about Black communities or Black people. They don't need to be educated, or education should be equal to what kids from other communities or white students were receiving. And that's why there was this big hurrah about trying to integrate. At Norfolk 12, was it Norfolk?
17.
17, and white kids stopped coming to school because they didn't. I don't understand that. Because we're in the same classroom, a little rub off.
The other thing to me, in addition to the racial component, I mean, there's not a person in that picture that's under 50.
Right.
Everybody has white hair. I mean, they look like me and you. And I don't think, even though we talk about Prime Plus with the focus on seniors, I still think it's applicable and appropriate to ask younger folk, tell us about some of the issues you think your grandparents, your parents are having that we can anticipate, that we can put together some kinds of programming that will assist them.
But there you go again, Steve, this idea that we're going to ask questions. Because we know, right? That group of people, and they're awesome people, and they're all good friends, and they knew. So you're saying that part of being intentional is to start asking that, leading the conversation with questions.
Well, I believe, again, I'm sure Andrea does as well, that if you're running any kind of organization, you have to have a mission and you have to have a vision. And without having some very measurable outcomes and strategies to get to operationalize that mission and that vision, you're not going anywhere. The only way you're going to do that is to ask questions and to hold yourself and the team accountable for what you say you want to do. Now, if you just want to fly with, oh, we're going to be everything to everybody that's over the age of 55 and on Social Security, that's fine. But if you don't get into some of the details about that and then have people ask the questions as to whether or not you're on target, what does the data say about how you're progressing? I mean, we could never run a school without looking at data and talking about student progress. We would last 5 minutes.
Well, then let me flip the page to the next picture, and this is Primeplus today.
Woo-hoo!
What do you see missing?
I see this.
Yeah. It looks like a complete picture, right?
Yeah, it looks more representative of our community.
So my hope is that we are constantly striving to look at what's missing, who maybe isn't at the table. So is the idea journey ever over, or do we have to be looking for improving?
Well, the proof is in the pudding, and it's the first step, having that kind of diversity amongst the board. But the proof is in the pudding when you get a picture of the participants that are coming in.
Mhm.
And if that number is comparable in terms of the breakdown and the complexity of the group, if it's similar to what we have here, then you know that you're making the kind of outreach that's necessary to have an organization or an entity that's representative of the community that it serves. And we take a look at the breakdown here in Norfolk, we've got what, 40, 35, 40% minority, African Americans, and other groups, minority groups that are part of that 35 or 40%. So can we say that we're on par or there's parity with the people that are participating?
You're gonna make me show the next slide, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, let me go back and revisit with the board. The board has dramatically changed, thanks to not just the two of you. And what we were intentional in the nominating committee to look at changing that first picture, but doing it in such a way that we were adding strength, not only just diversity, but strength to the board. We were intentionally looking for people that could help us go to an evidence-based programs that could put us into communities that we needed to be into. And so we didn't do a score sheet about how many Blacks. We actually didn't realize we were going to get somebody from China. But we wanted to have a stronger relationship with our university, so we have and nobody can pronounce his name on our board, who's been very active in getting us engaged in there.
We also have more people over, more people younger than 60.
I know it. I
I don't
know
know
it.
why I couldn't figure that out. I couldn't get it out. It took me a minute.
We do, and it's really cool. We have a financial planner who's
Oh,
on the board,
That's very
and they're bringing. I mean, he's the one that keeps saying your annual report was too long. It's got to be shorter.
Don't take this as an aside, seriously. You just triggered something. When you said, for example, and we can't pronounce his name.
Uh-oh.
Think about that for a
I
second.
know.
And how would we feel if someone said they couldn't pronounce your name?
that's right.
I was in a classroom years ago at high school, and the teacher, his name was Bobby. That was his name. His given name was Bobby. That teacher insisted that his name was Robert. And he said, no, my name is Bobby. He said, your name is Robert. And as long as you're in this classroom, you're going to be called Robert. And the boy teared up because his name was Bobby. He didn't want to be called by another name. So I think all of us have to be very sensitive to those, to those kinds of things. And we have to make a point of figure. I know teachers used to complain with these kids, particularly African American girls who came in with all these
Crazy
different
names.
names.
Yeah, they weren't crazy.
But I'm telling you, you had to figure out how to pronounce the name.
Yeah.
And the kid got offended as a result. Yeah.
Now I feel bad, but that's not why you brought it to my attention.
No.
But it's Dr. Zhu, by the way.
But I'm saying, those are little things that we take for granted when we want to be homogenized. And felt, because think about the number of people that came to this country that felt the need to change their name because they didn't want to be treated as an outsider.
My daughter spent some time in Africa, and it's interesting because, and this really upset her, because they have Christian names and they have African names. Because when they become Christian, apparently their name, their African name is not appropriate. And that offended her. And she would ask, no, I don't want your Christian name. Please tell me your African name. And then I will intentionally learn your given African name. And we have to do the same thing.
Because I think when we talk about early on in this conversation, we talked about the legislating versus absorbing. That's a good example.
Yeah.
They legislated, that's how they were gonna make that integration in South Africa. But what are you giving up?
Yeah,
Or what
that's
kind of
hard.
barrier are you creating?
Yeah,
Just think of one of the last example. They just had to pass a federal law outlining discrimination because of one who did their hair. And that was because of the different hairdos. And we talked about that earlier with girls in physical education not wanting to, take a shower because they didn't want to get their hair wet.
well, I mean, during that time, during the 60s and 70s, I mean, Black women could not, they had to process their hair, they had to straighten it. And I don't know, that was never a law, but definitely if you wanted to look professional and you wanted to be professional, you could not have natural hair. That's the only way you would be accepted.
But I thought natural hair was straight.
Not for me. This is it. See, it's what you get.
And I'm glad that you're able to wear it there because I love your hair. One of the things you mentioned, data. And so that's what we did with the annual report. This was right after you came on the board, Steve, and I think I shared this page with you, and it faces up that, we were serving in 2020, 23% African American, and 73% white. And someone made the comment, do we need to put that in the annual report? An annual report is data. Now, we had stories that we were telling, and through those stories, we were showing the breadth of service that we provided. But we couldn't run away from that one. I said, no, we're going to put that in the book. As long as we're able to say, we're going to be creating programs that are collaborative partnerships and evidence-based that will start changing those numbers. And that's where we're going to put it in black and white on paper, that we're going to be intentional about changing how we do our business. And so in doing that, it gives us a chance now to revisit, going back to IDA. And then that's about when we started giving birth to the tagline that, and it's more than just the tagline, it's the culture and the DNA for Primeplus of building a safe, respectful, and inclusive community. And that gets rewarded every day when I have people come in and say, this place is different. I just met somebody from Vietnam. I'm becoming engaged in more islands. So what's this got to do though with the person who might be watching this, who's not part of an organization, who's not changing an organization? How does it change a family to become intentional about creating a safe, respectful community?
I think IDEA, these terms are appropriate when we start talking about what kinds of broad categories do we want to focus in on when we look at our data. But beyond that, I think we need to accept something that's universally agreed upon, that can unite us so that we don't go down that little rabbit hole of talking about things from the standpoint of race and to a certain extent gender. But race seems to be the thing that's hanging us up too often when we get into the conversation. And where I'm going is with that last slide.
Yeah.
We talk about a set of core values that I don't think anyone can take issue with. And they're measurable. We can talk about whether or not we've created an environment where we feel like it's family, where we feel that we are accepted. Do we really care for each other? Are we showing respect when someone is ill and we go out of our way to make a phone call just to check on them, or to talk to someone about bringing them a meal if they're housebound? Can we say that we're responsible? Do we show respect to one another, even though we may disagree, but can we do it in a respectful manner? I think those are the things that people will accept, and if they reject those core values, then I think we have very little that we can work with. But I don't think there are too many people that take issue with these 5 values, and if we continue to put those in front of us and say these are things that we're all about, and these are the things that we're going to demonstrate in our day-to-day operations and how we interact with one another, I think you got half the battle.
And we need to do that globally. You know, I think if we do it in a small community like this, that's a good start. And hopefully people will begin to take that same behavior outside of Primeplus into other areas of their lives. And maybe we can start a change in what's happening in our world, because right now, in our own country, you know, we don't follow those core values.
You know, at the beginning of every Rotary meeting, we outlined those 4 things that we're all about. And I think having, again, I've worked in this concept with schools because it was really developed the understanding of making sure kids, handicapped kids, kids with disabilities would be included. It was the beginning for the Special Olympics with at the Kennedy Foundation. So I know the impact it can have when people accept these kinds of these principles, these values. It's just a matter of us continuing to demonstrate that if there's an issue and question something, are we doing it in a truthful and caring manner?
Some would say the last 2.5 years now have been some of the darkest times in the world's history.
Oh, it's still dark.
Exactly. Some would say that it also has provided us an opportunity to raise a new beginning. How do we do that? You mentioned, we've got our little world of Primeplus. And when we first started seeing people come back from their isolation, they came in next. And after a moment, we could see smiles coming into those eyes. I remember we had a gentleman come in from Gosnell Place, which is a supportive housing for former homeless. And we have a program with the supportive housing unit at the planning council to encourage people coming over here. And he was shell shocked because he was coming out of this world of isolation. And he sat and he started seeing, it was overstimulation almost. And then all of a sudden I started snuck into our window, and he had to sneak in because he didn't have the funds to pay for it in his farm. He came out and he was starting to learn how to woodburn. He was doing beautiful work. And all of a sudden I started seeing the shell shock guys take on a hallelujah. He had found his place. So we found an organization that helped pay for him to go to the woodshop and participate, but playing to his strength that he had given up on years ago. So how do we use now as the time of people kind of coming up? We had a member refer to it as we've had 2.5 years of sleepwalking. Now we're going to use your favorite term, awake.
That's it, woke.
So awoke. So how do we take advantage of the awokeness time?
Woke up.
We woke up. Do we have an opportunity facing this to kind of do it differently?
I think we just have to model behavior that we think is appropriate, given what we know. And too often what we see here, particularly on social media, is not consistent with what we're talking about. So you're really running against the grain in some ways. I mean, this idea of being confrontational, being nasty, and taking issue. I mean, I don't know the pandemic necessarily accentuate those actions, but I'm feeling and sensing some of that still. But again, until we can, I think the one thing we have going for us is that we're dealing with an older generation of people that may be willing to listen to some of the things that we're talking about that are able to make a change if it's necessary. I'm gonna always be optimistic, but I don't think there's anything in this country or in this world that we can't change if we put our minds to it. Change for good. You can't be called a Christian nation and really talk about teachings of Christianity and not do some of the things that we're saying we want to do. I mean, I just can't understand.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna ponder that. That's
Yeah.
right.
I mean, I've said that all the time. But I think when we have discussions like this, you know, we can bring more people to the table to have, we talked about the table earlier, to have discussions like this that are safe and respectful, and then I think for the older generation to even take that into their own homes, because my mom always says you are what you learn, right? And where do our kids learn to be who they are from their parents, right? So, you know, although I'm learning a lot from my daughter because she's really active in the community and you know, with Broadway and putting different people at the table. She's all into that, and women and people of color. So I've learned a lot about her and what she does, and she's always saying, "Mom, it's something you don't understand and read," you know. So, and I'm learning from her. I think people who are elderly can learn from the young, but we can learn from each other. You know, having a place for seniors like Primeplus, and that's a blessing. But I've also said to you, it needs to be someplace else in Chesapeake. It needs to be in
You can
Chesapeake.
broaden.
It needs to be in Virginia Beach. There needs to be a community like this for seniors throughout Hampton Roads.
But see, Prime Plus can be a stimulus for some of the changes that we're talking about through this network.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking, for example, in Boston, they would stop over 2 weeks ago. My church had we joined forces with the Presbyterian Church. We share 2 buildings, same building.
You really do. I checked it. The buildings are connected.
And we did have a breezeway.
That's great. That's cool.
And they had, but they did 2 I was gonna ask you about that, but I brought up, they did 2 prayers. One by the black church, one by the white church.
Well, at least they're connected by a breezeway.
Yeah.
Because
You
Sunday
know,
morning.
he made light of that breezeway. That's why I keep bringing it up. But, and we got a proclamation from Barbara Dyer to acknowledge both the Presbyterian Church and our church. But the point I want to make is that by virtue of you guys having a table there and all the interaction between the various providers, we had over 22 providers there. But the hit was the Zumba, which came from Prime Plus. She brought some of her people, and to see these folks, black, white, young, old, out there dancing, I mean, it just filled my heart. And this one lady, she was from Honda. Her husband was military, and I'd asked Barbara Hand to promote the program. So this young lady, listened to Barbara Hand's radio show the day before, that Friday, and said that we were going to have a representative from the vets there, and also these other things. She had 6 kids, and she was a day over 30. She said her husband was deployed, and she just wanted to get out, get a sense of what was going on outside of the rural neighborhood. Anyway, make a long story short, we had lunch. She sat down and had lunch, and she said, "I had no idea that this was going to be so rewarding, and I'm leaving here feeling very supported and appreciated. And I just love what you folks have done to make me feel this good about being here in this community." That's the stuff. That's the stuff that makes it all worthwhile.
Well, and you just validated us saying no to some opportunities. We have organizations that will call and say, "Hey, can we get a Zumba instructor to come in our unique community? You know, the whole birds of a feather flock together. We want them to come to our church basement and do a class." And we'll say, "No, why don't you bring your church basement to that central location?" Because it's not just a matter of doing Zumba, but it's doing Zumba in a stuff. Yeah, there she is, by the way.
Yeah.
That's the infamous Suzanne. I will say, you know, she will kill you. And what's really cool is you notice that she is going, it's equal. You know, she's gonna put pain on anybody.
Oh, yeah.
I know my body doesn't work.
If
I've tried
you will,
to,
if you will, if you do enough of
But
it.
she has her own entourage that travels with her too. Oh, it was great. I mean, it was just to sit back and see some of the people that were at the tables that didn't get into the line. They were at their table, they were dancing. Then you had maybe 25 or 30 people in front of her dancing. And then we had a food drive that was at the far end of the black church, all the way down there. And they were at least 30, 40 yards away, but the music was so loud they could hear it. And they're out there putting food in the back of these trucks and cars, and they're dancing. And it was just really a sight to behold, let me tell you.
music brings people together.
Yep.
Dancing brings people together.
Universal.
It is universal.
Well, you know, in December, in the fall of 2020, I was hearing that there were seniors who were being asked not to volunteer for like soup kitchens, those kinds of things, because they were vulnerable to
I
COVID.
don't like that word.
But because that's what we were called, because we were seniors. And so we decided that if we could create a safe environment for seniors to come together to give back, then we would do a food pantry. In December of 2020, we started doing a food pantry on Wednesdays, curbside. What's really cool is we've been averaging about 40 bags of food a week being given out to people by people who were told they couldn't do it before. When you mentioned dancing, and again, it's a whole, we have about 6 to 9 people, mixed bag. People. And I went by one day and they were ballroom dancing in the storage. Yeah.
In the storage room, was that a closet?
Yeah. It was in
You gotta get
a
back
big
to
closet.
college.
Okay, let me ask you, because we're coming down to the close. In creating that environment, something happened earlier that I don't think any hard feelings about it, except for Dr. Zhu, maybe, if you were to watch this. But you felt comfortable to bring it to my attention that I had done a faux pas. You turned it into a teaching moment. And I think we're better off for it. Instead of doing what we might have done a while ago, and before we had this conversation, we wouldn't have brought it up, but you would have gone, you know what that bozo did? Right? So how did that happen? Because it was, if I hadn't brought it up again, it would have been just kind of another part of our conversation.
2 things. One, I felt comfortable enough that I can say that to you.
A relationship.
Because I had that much respect for you, and I'm maybe a bit presumptuous, but I think I know where your heart is. And I don't think it was done as something, I don't think it was an intentional thing on your part. And the other reason I did it is because someone might not have that same feeling and support of you and like you the way I do. And would hear you say that. It wasn't anything that you would say that was dumb or negative. You hear that all the time. But I think that, as Andrew said, it could be a learning experience, you know, for all of us. And I'm sure there will be times when, if you haven't already done it, when you talk about the little breezeway thing, you're making fun of my little church.
I wasn't making fun.
Well, I'm saying it.
Yeah, I know.
But if you know someone well enough and you feel comfortable around them, you can say things and it's not done to hurt or to put them in their place or to say something that you intend to put them on the spot, then it's okay. I think.
I think when you build relationships, that's the key word to me, is having a relationship with people where you feel comfortable to share those, to say those things, to correct people. Now, if I didn't know you guys were friends, I would back up. You know, because you don't know how people are going to respond. But when you have relationships, and I think the 3 of us, because we've been doing this now for a couple of months, we have built a relationship that is safe. So we can say stuff.
Well, and I started this conversation off with, we've all had our journey to get to where we are, even though we tend to define ourselves by, or others define us as to where they met us in the journey. I've made a comment about my stepmother, and I've kind of given her permission, I guess, to be who she is because she's from Richmond, yes. But you said you're from Richmond, and her background is probably different than yours, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a lot different. Talk about being segregated.
So if I were to say she's from Richmond, you know what I mean? No, I don't know which.
Well, I do. I mean, I moved out of Richmond because Richmond was tough. It was tough as a young person living in Richmond. It was tough. My family, I grew up initially in the heart of Richmond where there was so much segregation. And there were black schools, black high schools. It was like that here, you know, Norfolk and being the black school and Churchland being the white school in Portsmouth. And there was John Marshall and Maggie Walker, and I went to the John Marshall, and my parents moved us out of Richmond into Henrico County, which put me at Hermitage, where I'm the only black kid in a room. You know, you get used to being the only black person in a space. You just get used to it. You know, I don't know how many students, but in every single class, it might have been 1 or 2 black kids in that class.
My experience is the same way from 8th grade all the way to my senior year. There was that kid.
Yeah.
And I went to an all boys high school with almost 2,000 kids. And until my senior year, there was 1 black guy that was in my basic class. In my senior year.
It's funny that, you know, you brought that up because my mom and I had a conversation. She was a school teacher and she taught home economics at Maggie Walker. And me being in an elementary school, in the 3rd grade, I was held back. But I wasn't the only kid that was held back in the 3rd grade. All the black kids in the class were held back. My mom, being an educator, could not dispute it. Couldn't now, when I looked at my report cards, they were all A's and B's, or, you know, I went maybe B's and C's. So why was I held back? I was held back because I was black. So I've already started with the deficit.
Funny too, because I think I may have shared this real quick with you. When I was in that role as coordinator of minority education, we had a school, a middle school, actually a middle school that was in the county, but it was right on the city-county line, and it was a school, for the most part, all Jewish kids. And there was a number of black kids, families moving out of Baltimore City into Baltimore County for the Pikesville Middle School, and the principal, Elliot Beard, who never forget, told his counselors, I don't care what the records say with these kids coming from Baltimore City, you put them in special education.
Let me fast forward now to not just today, but all of us have had a fingerprint on creating a future difference. Early on, when you talked about sports and teaching and coaching, I asked you about star. Your daughter legitimately is a star in this moment, right? Yeah. But she's taking, yeah, I'm not going to mention who she is,
Yeah.
but, and I always bring her up because she's taking that stardom and doing something with it because of the mom and dad she had. And this is the mom who got passed over on 3rd grade. So how do you not how do you change, you can't change the tapes from our history, but how do you prevent the tapes from defining us and then changing the tapes for our next generation? Because all of us have that responsibility.
Yeah, what did I say? You are what you live.
Mhm.
So, I mean, my daughter knows from us, we've always been involved in our community or in the community or helping young people, you know, and or we have spoken out for various situations, and that's all she's seen. So that's what she does. She is what she is what she is because of how she grew up. She had friends from all over the place. I mean, it was some talking to for me with my husband for her to start, go do sleep outs or sleepovers in homes that didn't look like us. I took a little getting used to because how my husband grew up. But yeah, always had a variety of friends from all over the place, and they'd come to my home. So they were always welcome to my home. She was welcome.
So is it the terminology, Steve, or is it the actions?
I'm just reflecting on, my kids.
Yeah.
I had a similar situation in the 8th grade. I'll never forget the teacher got on me because I did the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and she singled me out because I was the only black kid in the classroom who didn't know that. And those were the amendments that freed my people. And that prompted me to go home to study in the back of the social study book, all the amendments to the Constitution. I said, boy, I like this stuff. I found it fascinating. And that's why I became a history teacher. But my son, having understood some of the same challenges that we faced growing up in Baltimore with segregated housing, schools were just beginning to desegregate. This is back in the mid-50s, well before things happened here in Norfolk. But he has a resolve today, and my daughter as well. They're both very active in the community. My son writes editorials. He'll get on the phone with me on any given occasion, and we talk about various issues associated with what's going on in the country. I mean, he has a resolve that he's going to make a difference in his life and in the life of my granddaughter, who's graduating next week from high school, and got a full scholarship to Frostburg University, and this kid wants to be a doctor, and I'm sure she's going to too. And that's the kind of challenge that I think our kids are facing today. They're not going to be pigeonholed. They're not going to allow that. My son will go and advocate for my granddaughter in a heartbeat. I mean, she goes to a private school, but I can tell you, we've had conversations galore about how he had to go there and talk to that staff about the things that he expected them to do to make sure that my granddaughter, his daughter, wasn't being fun because she's been singled out as a kid who's biracial.
Well, my daughter is well, this is where we start getting in trouble, right? Your daughter, my daughter. But I just spent 3 days with mine, who's in Charlotte. She's a model and a teacher. And she started calling me out on some of those casual comments that were made. She's a model that used to be called a plus size model. And if you go to you'll find her under plus size instead of regular size. Or we would make a comment about, they're looking for, the star, they aged well. Because we deal with these labels so often. And I mean, she's become the label to me and calling it out. And it really is, at first it was kind of caught me off guard, but it also then started informing me of how important language is. Right. And that when people have tapes and that could be a good place to. Okay, we got a couple of minutes left. We've had a great conversation, and I hope we recorded it. Yeah, but what do we do with this? What are you hoping that we can accomplish with
I'm
this?
hoping a lot of people join or, at least check it out. I think it's a conversation that everyone should be having, with people from different communities. Let's be safe. Let's be intentional about trying to make change.
I'm trying to create another level of obligation or responsibility. But given the fact that three of us have had this conversation on multiple occasions, I was very comfortable helping Andrea and you facilitate a discussion with other members, either the board or some of the attendees that will come from Primeplus, because I think it's important for people to understand if a comfort level is developed, particularly if we model that kind of comfort. Well, I could say something to you, and you can say something to me that, as Andrew said, she didn't have to pull out of the way, then that sets in motion that thinking, well, boy, they're from different backgrounds, they have different levels of training, but yet they can come together and they're very comfortable talking to one another and dealing with some tough issues. And still can smile and walk away and still say that, you know, they're friendly. I've shared some stuff with you regarding some of the health stuff that I've worked with with doctors that I wouldn't share with other people because I feel comfortable enough that I can say that to you. And we've had that conversation. And you were very quick when you see me at various meetings. How's it going, Steve? And working on, you know, getting that doctor that you want to take a look at your, you know, your illness. So those are things that I think can be put in front of individuals that we work with, and certainly people that come to Primeplus and they can learn from witnessing, modeling that.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you that having honest and open conversations with you guys is so much easier than doing Zumba with Suzanne. It really is. And someday, you know, we're gonna move my relationship with Suzanne from having a conversation, her asking me what my socks look like today. To act, you like to, they're influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright.
One of my favorite architects.
See, there you go. We have a common.
Yeah.
And we hope that for those of you that have tuned in or will be tuning in under the recorded version, we'll understand how easy it can become when you go for an understanding of the people that you're with, no matter who they are. I think so often we look at terminology as defining our journey, but sometimes letting that heart and mind working together will do it. Thanks for joining us, and come on by Primeplus at 7300 Newport Avenue in Norfolk and check it out, or check it out on primeplus.org. We want to meet you where you're at, so come on and join us. Thanks a lot. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
This is cool.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, Robert.
Got it to go away.